Now that we know all the important theoretical fundamentals, we can start building our RDF graph. To do this, we start by creating a simple RDF triple in GraphDB. We will create our first triple using the GraphDB workbench. Therefore, open your GraphDB desktop app and then click on the button Open GraphDB Workbench. When you open GraphDB for the first time, you should see something like this Welcome panel. You can hide the panel by clicking on this button. Before we create our first RDF triple, we need to create a new repository. Therefore, click on this button, Create New Repository. Then you have three options. We want just a basic GraphDB repository. Therefore, we click on the first option. When you create a GraphDB repository, it is very important that every repository in your GraphDB database has a unique ID. In this case, I give my repository the ID MovieBase. You can also give a repository a description. Something like this: triple store for my favorite movies. All the other settings remain untouched for now. Then we can create our repository. You can go to your repository by clicking on MovieBase. Now you can see some information about your active repository, which is in this case called MovieBase, and it's time to import our first RDF triple. You can either do this by clicking on Import RDF data or by going to the sidebar and click on Import. You then have three options. You can either upload an RDF file like Turtle, or you can fetch some RDF data from the web through a URL. The third option is to import an RDF text snippet and therefore define your RDF triple directly in the GraphDB user interface. We will use the third option. So let's start by defining the subject first. Remember that every resource in our triple should be identified through a URI. Therefore, let's define the URI first, so the schema and the path. Let's try something like https mymovies.com. It doesn't matter if this URL is available in the web, because we host our GraphDB locally. And to be more precise, we give it a path called data. And then we can assign fragments to this path. Remember the first example, that the Kingdom of Heaven has the actor Orlando Bloom? We will use this example for our first triple. So we start our fragment with a hashtag. As an alternative, you can use a backslash, but I prefer the hashtag more. And then we write Kingdom of Heaven. This is the subject. The predicate is basically the same, more or less. However, I recommend to give predicates a different path, something like concepts, since predicates are a bit different than subjects and object resources, because they are reused very often in GraphDB or in RDF triples. And the predicate in this case is has actor. And finally the object, which is basically similar to Kingdom of Heaven when we take the URI perspective. Just copy and paste the subject and then just change the fragment. In this case, Orlando. At the end of each triple, you put a dot. This clarifies that the statement is finished. Since we have finished our triple, we can click on Import. In this window, you can define to which graph your triple is assigned. Each repository usually can hold multiple graphs. By default, a default graph is created when your repository is created. However, the name default graph is a bit poor for assigning our triple. we define our own named graph. And we use the same schema and path for our named graph as for our subjects and objects in our tuple. Click on Import, and you can see now that your text snippet that you wrote previously has been imported successfully in less than a second to your repository. Let's see how our first tuple looks like. Click on Explore, Graphs Overview, and then you can choose between the default graph, which should be empty, and our new edited graph, https mymovies.com data. Click on it, and you see our first tuple. Kingdom of Heaven as actor, Orlando Bloom. Subject, predicate, object. You can also click on each of them and focus them. And when you focus your resources, you can also click on Visual Graph to render a graph view. In this case, you can see this is a subject, Kingdom of Heaven. This is the object, Orlando Bloom, and they are connected through a predicate named hasActor. Congratulations! You defined your first tuple and uploaded it to your GraphDB database. If you want to learn more about ontologies, linked data, and the semantic web in general, I can highly recommend my Udemy course. There you will not only learn all the basics about RDF, but also about the query language SPARQL, automated inference of new information using reasoning, and developing your own ontology-based apps. You can find the link to the course in the video description.